When I left school, I went to York School of Art, and all students had to do a little bit of everything at the beginning. Lettering, perspective, modelling, painting, drawing. And I needed a craft, so I did pottery. I ended up teaching, and I came over to Belfast. There were 3 other people in the department in ceramics, and one of them was an old-fashioned guy who had a studio. His name was George Cook, and I said, George, show me how to throw. George, how do I make a handle? How do I pull a spout? And I gradually had an introduction to clay, which became stronger and stronger. When I go into somebody's house, my wife would sometimes apologise for me. She'll say, please forgive Pete, because I'll go up to the mantelpiece and I'll lift things up and I'll look at the bottom and I'll feel it and I'll twist it round in my hand. It's instinctive for me. I want to see how they've been done, I want to see who has done them, I want to examine, because part of the appreciation is understanding how the thing's been made, and it's not just in clay. I would collect things, I would look at pieces of furniture, I would admire a barley sugar twist, and the way that twist sort of fits onto, say, a mahogany drawer or something. So I would acquire this love of process, this love of the way that things fitted together.
For very big work, you need something that's really quite coarse, called crank. It has a lot of fire clay in it, and very often it comes and it's really quite solid. And you'll have to be bashing it and pounding it and working at it, and that can be really knackering. And the other thing is as well, you're limited by the length of your arms. So on a piece this size, about 2.5 metres square or something like that, you find when you get to the middle that you can't reach anymore. You have to sort of like think ahead and actually roll out from the middle and work outwards. Otherwise you end up with big footprints all over it. The gasworks piece was, it was the first piece I did here. It was very big, had to do it in sections. Probably about 2 metres sections at a time. Everything had to be numbered and put on pallets and fired and then put back on pallets and then delivered to site. So it was really quite a baptism of fire, I suppose. Cotton court was sort of something a bit different. I sort of took the notion to do a sort of big relief map of the area based on the different shops and the different businesses that would have been there over the last sort of 200-300 years. And then I said, you know, it'd be really nice that we just finish it off and put a border of tiles that are done by shops and businesses that are in the area now, and that would bring it right up to date. So I invited basically everybody and anybody who came into the workspace at all to make a tile just on themselves or, you know, that moment in time. I was extremely conscious that it was the historical area where the pothouse was. You know, that was actually really at the forefront of my mind and was a direct connection between what had been there before and what I was doing.
In the 18th century, there were 3 potteries in Belfast. There was the Belfast Pothouse in Waring Street. There was another pottery in Corporation Street, which probably made Delphi the same as the original pothouse. And the biggest pottery probably ever built in the British Isles, bigger even than Balik, was built at the bottom of the Ravenhill Road. And they were all using this remarkable white clay from Carrickfergus. If you'd been around in the 17th century, this would have probably been as fine a piece of pottery as you would ever find. This is something I found in a hole in the ground in Corporation Street. It's a cooking pot, as would have been used by a middle-class family in Belfast. But If you look at some of the pieces that were then made in Belfast, including these coloured wares, you can see that we did a reasonable job of making a good looking pot. The main important bit really to have come from Belfast in the last 10 years or so is this little shoe, which is a rare thing too. There's another one in the National Museum in Dublin. And as far as we know, there's only the two of them. But somehow this stuck around Belfast for 300 years to turn up in a local market. Everyone today knows Belfast as being a place that made ships and linen and rope and the tobacco works. But in fact, before 1800, there was a completely different range of industries here. Really, the industries that survived after 1800 in the Act of Union were businesses that in effect didn't compete with English businesses. The ones that died out, such as the pottery and the glass manufacture in the 18th century, they did compete with England, and so they were essentially extinguished.
What I'll do is I'll draw into the surface, draw the design just in line, and then basically start filling in, just adding more and more clay. I quite like playing with the surface to get a sense of depth within as little as possible, and I suppose that's quite a historically traditional way of doing sculpture on buildings and things like that.
The whole essence of the idea is to use a kind of face mask of meat up there. The idea actually came from pots that North German potters had been making with the figure of Cardinal Bellarmine, who was a cleric in the 16th century. The Cardinal was a very strong man. He was totally anti-drink, and he made an edict banning drink. Many sections of society took umbrage to that, the potters included, and so they started to put his face mask on all their drinking flagons and bottles. It's a lovely idea. It's very powerful for me as a creative artist.
This is printmaking technique, but it's done in ceramic. Instead of an ink, you have a slab with a ceramic colour spread onto it, and you're using this special tissue paper. It's called transfer tissue. And you're drawing your picture onto the paper, and it's picking it up on the back, and then you're transferring that to the clay. Because your clay is damp, it's going to actually wet the ceramic colour. If you just smooth it. My inspiration comes from around me. Sometimes just to take half an hour and go out for a walk and see what you can see. It kind of clears your head, and you can be thinking about what you're going to do. I would do a bit of bird watching, and a lot of my images would come from the natural world. Now, the beauty of porcelain is that you can, if you fire it up high enough, you can see through it. So what I'm really trying to do is I'm trying to get it thin enough that you can see through it. You know, the thinner it goes, the more translucent you'll get it, but obviously it may melt in the kiln and sort of collapse. So it's kind of pushing it far enough that you can get what you want without having a disaster.